Hi, this is Sandi Maki with a little bit of heavy breathing just before midnight. Sometimes the people that are closest to us in our lives, parents, teachers, family, friends, are some of the least empowering people that could be in our lives. And it's not that people in these circles mean to be less empowering than others. It's just that sometimes because of their role in our lives, I think they become what we could refer to as the safety net critics. The people who ultimately want our success, but they don't want to see us fail, they don't want to see us fall, they don't want to see us struggle. And yet, when you think about it, that's where most of the growth happens. I was having a conversation with someone in my sphere that could be empowering at times and not so empowering at other times. And the conversation that we were having was regarding my children. And for those of you who know, or for those of you who don't, I've got 2 children, and they are 15, almost 16, so I almost have a new driver, who if it were up to me, I would give her license tomorrow, because she's competent and great, and I know she'll do great with that. And then my son, who is 13 going on 14. And I'll tell you, parenting doesn't come with a manual, and it's not always easy, and yet it's simple at the same time. And I know some days are better than others, and some days maybe I wonder why, or how can I make this have a better outcome than what it is? Yet, it's really simple. My children are amazing. They are outstanding. When I hear people in certain circumstances talk about their children, sometimes it just breaks my heart. I was involved in a group several months ago, and we were doing a discussion about personality types. And the people attending this group were parents with children at various stages and areas of development. And one of the parents was maybe having a bad day or a bad week, or I don't know, maybe a hard year. It's hard to know sometimes what all the circumstances are. And she relayed to the group that she was there because her son was so much trouble. She had a bad kid. And I met this kid only briefly, and I only saw him for a matter of minutes. But in this case, I can tell you that the problem was not her son. I know that we each come into the world with our own personality styles and our own sense of right and wrong, and then it's taught to us through that sphere of influence that we have. I think that in a lot of cases, it's not the kids, it's parents and parenting styles that have so much to do with whether it could be perceived as a good thing or not. Well, I have amazing kids, and that doesn't mean that we're without our struggles. We have moments where maybe voices get raised or frustrations mount, and then we have times when everything is perfect, or so it seems. Well, I had a little bit of an energetic thing last week. When we hit the teenage years, I think we as parents, and especially me, having been a teenager myself, I can completely relate. And yet when it's happening, I find it hard to be objective. Teenagers have, moods and mood swings and hormones. And that doesn't mean that the baseline of who they are is changing. It just means that at certain times, certain things coming into their lives will impact them in ways where maybe we don't always see the best and brightest side. And when this happened to me, I took it really personally. And it's interesting because I don't often take things like this very personally, and I don't often have the need to. Like I said, my kids are great, and normally there's no wrong answer. Whatever is going on, we can work through it. And I always try to step back, especially knowing what I know about personality styles, coping mechanisms, and in the case of my daughter, who is very much like me, I need to put myself in her shoes, because how would I feel and how would I react if something were going on? And then I can completely understand where the behavior is coming from. It doesn't mean I have to like it, and that doesn't mean it feels good. But in this case, when we had a little bit of a moment, nothing was wrong, voices weren't raised, there was no yelling. There was just a place where I was and where she was, and we weren't on the same page. And that hurt me probably more than any amount of yelling or screaming could have, which was really interesting. And it sent me on an introspective journey of, how do I feel about the way that things are going? What could I do different? What could I do better? Am I doing anything wrong? And the conclusion that I came to, which really shouldn't have taken me that long, is that teenagers have things going on in their lives. They're learning how to become independent young adults. There are feelings maybe that are growing, they're changing, hormones, that could have something to do with it. So there's a lot of different reasons that things could come up into the forefront, and there's reasons things are changing. So when all's said and done, after I had talked through it a little bit, I realized I'm doing everything in the best way that I can. Kids don't come with an instruction manual, and I think even if they did, you couldn't really get all the possible scenarios in the book. Which reminds me of the conversation that my daughter and I had about her driver's training. Because at the back of the book for driver's training, there's a parent-child contract. And in this parent-child contract, I suppose it's like they're trying to write an owner's manual for how to deal with things. So my daughter was reading through it. It was an assignment for her class where we were supposed to come up with her rules for driving. So she was saying, how late am I allowed to stay out? How many people can I have in the car? What happens if I get into an accident? And that was the one I had told her basically with this book. Well, you fill in what you think all of the answers should be. I'll review it with you, and if anything needs to change, we'll talk about it. Knowing that I'm giving her the choices to decide what her reality should look like. I don't see any problem with that. And she was maybe getting a little frustrated because I wasn't willing to lay down the rules. So it got to the part about the accident. What happens? What are the consequences if I get into an accident? And I said, well, tell me what started the accident. Was it that you were goofing around? Were you busy talking when you should have been paying attention? Was it an accident? Was somebody else busy talking when something happened? Is it something that you had any control over or no control over? And if you had control over it, what were the other conditions that were resulting in this happening? So if you can imagine, I couldn't really put down a consequence to an accident because I don't know what all of the things would be going into that accident. So I think what we put in her book was we'll have to see what happens, and then based on what happens, we'll decide on the next course of action. It may or may not be comfortable for a child to have to come up with their own decisions, but I am of the mindset that automatically at the age of 18, kids don't all of a sudden find the magic button with all the answers. They need to be guided into a process of making good decisions. And that's what I suppose the fundamental building block of my parenting style has been since my children were little. How can you make the best choice for yourself in this situation possible, knowing in general how we feel, we meaning our family unit, how we feel about certain things and what our expectations would be. Because I think if we empower our children to make good choices, no matter how old they are, they will be able to do that, and they will have a certain amount of authority over their own lives that a lot of people don't. I know when I talk to my kids about how their friends are being raised or how their friends are being parented, we maybe are an anomaly. I know that there's other families who maybe interact in a similar way that we do, and then I can think of some that are polar opposites. I know some parents who won't let their children do anything an entire weekend if they're going to have a test on Monday. What I expect from my children is that they know what the expectations are in school and that they accommodate their schedule to make sure that they cover what they need to. And if they don't, it's not my problem. I'm not the one who had the test. It's theirs. And guess what? My children do that. They know what the expectations are and they make things happen. At this point, I could launch into a whole other discussion about the educational system and some of the flaws that I see in that, but not having a strong solution, I won't go there right at the moment. I know parents of other kids who don't allow them to learn how to be independent, strong individuals because they're too busy setting up all of the, the posts for the fence that they're locking them into, I suppose, is a good analogy. Well, back to what I started this conversation with. I was having a discussion with someone who's in my safety net critic sphere. And we were talking about my parenting style. And they were commenting on the fact that I had great kids, which is why my parenting style was able to work. And I disagree with that. I think that I have great kids because the parenting style that I have allows them to make their own choices, to be great kids. I also think that my parenting style, the other comment that came up was, wow, I'm so lucky that it hasn't backfired on me. And again, I disagree with that. I think because of the parenting style that I have, where there is no wrong answer, and everything is open for discussion, whether or not our tempers will go up a little bit, or whether or not it's always the smoothest conversation. There is no wrong answer. And if my kids feel a certain way, I'd really like them to express that to me. This is something that I had to work on, because a lot of the things that I would have said no to, can you have a sleepover on a school night? My knee-jerk reaction may have been no. And it may have been no just because when I was growing up, it wasn't an option. But every time I was asked the question and I was automatically going to say no, I stopped myself. And I said, why would I need to say no to this? I have good kids. They know the expectations. If they're going to stay up all night, not get any sleep, and be a pill the next day, then probably it's not a great idea. But in this case, I know that that's not going to happen. So do I really need to say no? And the answer was no. So sleepovers on a school night are something that's acceptable. What about studying for a test the next week? Do I need to keep you home and limit all of your activities, not allow you to see your friends or do anything fun just because you have a test on Monday? Absolutely not. Because if you know it, you know it. If you don't, you don't. And cramming for 48 hours before it is not going to make it any better or any worse. Maybe for some kids, having structured review time is the right thing. And maybe studying in certain circumstances is what will work. I know that I see it a lot in places where I don't necessarily think it's appropriate. But that's not for me to judge. It's me to parent my children as I see fit. There's a lot of other things that, as my kids have been growing up, depending on what season they were in their life, there's different things that happen. And I always need to stop and think, what could my answer be? What could my answer be to this? And when I don't really know what the answer could be or should be, or even when I do, when my children ask me something, I often say, well, what would you like my answer to be? When they say, am I allowed to do this or that? I say, well, do you think you should be? And whatever they come up with is typically the way that we go. Because they are empowered to make good decisions, and they are empowered to be good young people. And again, that's not to say we haven't been without our ups and downs. There was a brief time in my son's childhood where he visited the principal's office quite a bit. And I never went down to the office, and I didn't ground him for a lot of things. But if I did get that call from the principal's office, normally I asked if I could talk to him. And I said, what happened? And do you think that you were making good decisions? And all I need from you now is for you to move forward in your day, making the best decisions possible. Do you think you can do that? And sure enough, the answer was yes. And I think every day in every way, both of my kids continue proving that they have the ability to do that. Another thing with teenagers that I have to keep in mind is peer pressure. And when it comes to driving or hanging out with friends or going to parties or anything else, I think that peer pressure, the desire to fit in, the desire to have a good time, the desire to explore the boundaries of living our lives, those all come into play. And there's no way that I could expect my kids to make better decisions than me when I still succumb to peer pressure myself as an adult. When I'm out with friends and we're having a good time, normally if it's having fun in the moment, I'll say sure. I don't know what the consequences will be tomorrow. I don't know what the potential outcome of my actions may be. But sometimes, given a decision that I probably wouldn't have made, sometimes when I'm out with friends and I'm having a good time, I'll make a decision that surprises even me. So I couldn't expect any more of my children, especially when they haven't had as much life practice, experience, or simply years under their belts as I do. So I'm going to be as understanding as I possibly can as we come across some of those decisions. Because there isn't one age where everyone has all the magic answers. And there's not a point where we're all perfect, because I'm not. And I couldn't expect my children to be. What I can expect that we will do is have great conversations, sometimes more comfortable than others. Great is in the eye of the beholder. We're going to talk about things. And when things come up that we don't know how to handle, we'll discuss them. And as I would like my children to continue evolving in their amazing skill set as they turn into wonderful young adults, I'm going to continue asking them what they think the answer should be. And in every case where we can, we're going to honor that. And in the case where they really do not know the answer, or they don't know what it should be, then I'll nudge them in the direction that I hope is going to be helpful to them, as that's my job as a parent. So I don't know where you are on the topic. I don't know if your kids are young, old, or if you ever have questions about parenting and instruction manuals. My best bit of advice is to navigate each question as it comes up. And don't feel that you need to live by a rule book, because I don't think that's the healthiest answer. And you may be saying, yeah, you're so full of it, and hey, that's fine. It's what works for me. It's what my style allows me to do. And it is one of the things that has empowered me to have great, amazing young people to spend a lot of my time in my life with. So, until next time, as you ask yourself, what's the best possible outcome here? And as you encounter young people, encourage them to figure out what the best outcome is and allow them to explore it themselves, because I think that's even more powerful than when we just try to come up with it for them. Make it a great one.